Well, Why I Turned Right was an anthology. It was sort of like giving a dinner party, really, where I had a dozen people talk about themselves and their political journeys. And in each case, these were people who had moved from left to right, including people who are pretty well-known authors, P.J. O'Rourke, Stanley Kurtz, other people whose names would be familiar to baby boom conservatives especially. And I was interested in that because I've always been fascinated by the question of why people believe what they believe, and this is one of the themes that unites my otherwise disjointed seeming work. My first book was called Home Alone America, and it was about what's happening with kids in America as a result of what are called family changes, which is a sort of umbrella term for the way we live now. It's an umbrella term for what has happened to the family after the sexual revolution. And the argument of that book is that the burdens of the way we live now are falling heavily on the most vulnerable shoulders. So there's a chapter in the book on childhood health problems that didn't used to exist that I trace to the parentless home. There's a chapter on popular music where I sit down and listen to things like Eminem and the kinds of things that most parents don't want to listen to. But what I take to that is, look what they're saying. They're talking about coming from dysfunctional places, and that's nowhere as true as it is of Eminem, the biggest rap rock star of the past 20 years, 15 years anyway. So I try to get under the skin of some of that stuff and see what kids are saying about themselves. This same theme that we are not treating well the most vulnerable among us was also the theme of my only work of published fiction, a book called The Loser Letters, A Comic Tale of Life, Death, and Atheism. And in that book, I try to go at these same themes from a different direction by getting into the head of a fictional character, a woman in her mid-20s who is in rehab. And as she tells her story, we realize that what's brought her to rehab is a series of events that are really common to people in the years after the sexual revolution. So I can't say much more without giving her story away, and it is a story of fiction. It's not didactic. It doesn't beat people over the head. But in that case, I was trying to explore some of these same themes from a fictional point of view, hopefully to reach other people than the people my nonfiction tends to reach. And I hope it was a modestly successful experiment because it's a book that teenagers and people in their 20s seem especially interested in. And I'm grateful for that. The next book, Adam and Eve After the Pill, is a look at the fallout of the sexual revolution. And it's a countercultural book, as you might expect from the title, because it marches through the secular empirical evidence of what's happened to society in the years since the pill was approved. 50 plus years ago, we had this momentous thing happen in our world. And I think everybody who's candid looking at the results, whether they think it's a great thing or a bad thing, would agree that this is one of the most seminal events in human history. So what I try to do in that book is to say, okay, what is the result? What's going on with kids? What's going on with men? What's going on with women? And again, I think the case I make is a contrarian case, but it's one that's made with strictly empirical evidence. And this is something that I really would like to stress in all my work. And I'm not a biasless observer. None of us are, right? We all bring our things to the table. But in all of my work, I use evidence, most of it amassed by perfectly secular people. I use empirical evidence and data, and I don't go near theology because that's not my area. What interests me is the way that secular evidence affirms some pretty unpopular things that the churches have been saying for a long time. And so that's one way of looking at what weaves my work together. I realize it can look pretty random, as the kids like to say, if you just look at the book titles, but there are certain themes that are consistent in there.